The dust settled around the wagon train as it came to a grinding halt in the middle of the desert. Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow and looked out at the endless expanse of red rock and scrub brush that stretched before them. She had been traveling for 3 months now, leaving behind her comfortable life in Boston to marry a man she had never met in the frontier town of Silver Creek. Her father had arranged the marriage to settle his gambling debts. Thomas Whitmore was a wealthy rancher who needed a wife, and Sarah's father needed money. It was a simple transaction, but one that would change Sarah's life forever. She clutched the letter from Thomas in her hand, reading his promises of a good life and a comfortable home for the 100th time. The wagon master, a gruff man named Jake Morrison, walked alongside the train checking the wheels and harnesses. He had been leading wagon trains across this dangerous territory for 15 years, and his weathered face showed every mile of those journeys. The Apache had been more active lately, and everyone knew the risks of traveling through their lands. Sarah's traveling companion was Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, an older widow who was also heading west to start a new life. Eleanor had lost her husband in the war and decided to join her brother, who owned a general store in California. The two women had become close during the long journey, sharing stories and fears about their uncertain futures. As the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, Sarah noticed movement in the hills surrounding their path. At first she thought it might be wild animals, but then she saw them clearly. Apache warriors were watching them from the rocky outcroppings, their horses standing perfectly still in the shadows. Jake Morrison had seen them too. He quietly passed word down the line for everyone to stay calm and keep moving. The Apache weren't necessarily hostile, but they were protective of their territory. Many wagon trains had passed through without incident, but others had not been so fortunate. Sarah's heart raced as she caught glimpses of the warriors. They moved like shadows across the landscape, appearing and disappearing among the rocks and cacti. Their presence was both frightening and fascinating. She had heard stories about the Apache from other travelers, tales of fierce warriors who could track a man across miles of desert and strike without warning. One warrior in particular caught her attention. He sat atop a painted horse on a distant ridge, his long black hair flowing in the desert wind. Even from far away she could sense his strength and dignity. He seemed to be studying the wagon train intently, his gaze moving from wagon to wagon as if cataloging everything he saw. Eleanor noticed Sarah's fascination and grabbed her arm. "Don't stare at them, child," she whispered urgently. It's not safe to draw their attention, but it was too late. The warrior on the ridge had noticed Sarah watching him. For a moment, their eyes met across the vast distance, and Sarah felt something stir within her that she had never experienced before. It was a mixture of fear and attraction that left her breathless and confused. The wagon train continued its slow progress through the afternoon, and gradually, the Apache disappeared from view. But Sarah couldn't shake the image of the warrior from her mind. There had been something in his gaze, something that spoke to her soul in a way that Thomas Whitmore's letters never could. As evening approached, Jake Morrison called for the wagons to circle up for the night. They had reached a small water source, a precious find in the desert. The travelers quickly set up camp, building a fire in the center of the circle and preparing their simple evening meal. Sarah helped Eleanor prepare their supper, but her mind kept wandering back to the warrior on the ridge. She wondered who he was, what his life was like, and why his image haunted her thoughts. She tried to push these dangerous thoughts away and focus on her upcoming marriage to Thomas, but it was impossible. That night, as the camp settled down to sleep, Sarah lay awake in her bedroll staring up at the stars. The desert was alive with sounds she had never heard before. The distant call of a coyote, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, and the whisper of wind through the rocks. Suddenly she heard a different sound, barely audible above the natural noises of the desert. It was the soft thud of horse hooves on sand, moving slowly around their camp. Sarah held her breath and listened intently. Someone was out there watching them. She carefully lifted her head and peered over the edge of the wagon. In the dim moonlight, she could make out the silhouette of a rider moving silently through the shadows just beyond the circle of wagons. It was him, the warrior from the ridge. Their eyes met again across the darkness, and this time the connection was even stronger. Sarah felt drawn to him in a way that defied all reason and convention. She knew she should wake Jake Morrison or call for help, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. The warrior sat motionless on his horse for several long minutes, simply watching her. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he melted back into the darkness and was gone. Sarah lay back down, her heart pounding and her mind racing. She knew that everything was about to change, though she couldn't yet understand how or why. The encounter had awakened something inside her, a yearning for a life very different from the one that waited for her in Silver Creek. The next morning dawned clear and hot, and the wagon train prepared to continue its journey. Sarah said nothing to Eleanor about what she had seen in the night, but she couldn't stop thinking about the warrior and the strange connection she had felt with him. As they loaded their belongings back into the wagon, Jake Morrison approached them with a concerned expression. "Ladies," he said quietly, "we had visitors last night. Apache scouts were watching our camp. We need to be extra careful today and stick close together." Sarah nodded and tried to look appropriately worried, but inside she felt a strange sense of anticipation. Something told her that this was not the last time she would see the mysterious warrior, and despite all the dangers that might bring, she found herself hoping it was true. 3 days passed without any sign of the Apache, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. The wagon train moved steadily westward through increasingly difficult terrain, with rocky passes and steep climbs that tested both the animals and the travelers. On the 4th morning, disaster struck. The lead wagon hit a hidden rock and broke its front axle, bringing the entire train to a sudden halt. Jake Morrison cursed loudly as he examined the damage. They were in a particularly vulnerable position, trapped in a narrow canyon with high walls on both sides. "How long will it take to fix?" asked Mr. Peterson, the owner of the broken wagon. Jake shook his head grimly. "At least a full day, maybe 2. We'll have to unload everything and jack up the wagon to replace the axle, and we don't have much choice about where to do it." The canyon made everyone nervous. It was the perfect place for an ambush with no way to escape if they were attacked, but they had no choice but to make repairs where they were. The men began unloading the damaged wagon while the women prepared an early lunch. Sarah was carrying water from a small stream when she heard Eleanor scream. She dropped her bucket and ran toward the sound, her heart racing with fear. What she saw made her blood run cold. Apache warriors had emerged from hidden positions in the canyon walls. They had appeared as if from nowhere, surrounding the wagon train completely. There had to be at least 30 of them, all mounted and armed with bows and rifles. The travelers huddled together in the center of their circle, terrified and helpless. Jake Morrison stood with his rifle ready, but he knew it was useless against so many opponents. The Apache could have killed them all in the first moments if that had been their intention. The warrior Sarah had seen before rode forward from the group. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His face was painted with red and black designs, and he wore a necklace of silver and turquoise around his strong neck. He spoke in perfect English, his voice deep and commanding. "I am Running Wolf of the Chiricahua Apache. You are traveling through our lands without permission." Jake Morrison stepped forward, trying to keep his voice steady. "We mean no harm to your people. We're just passing through on our way to California." Running Wolf's dark eyes swept over the group of frightened travelers, lingering for a moment on Sarah. She felt that same electric connection she had experienced before, even stronger now that they were face to face. "Your people have broken their promises many times," Running Wolf said. "They take our land and kill our game. Why should we let you pass?" "We're not soldiers or settlers," Jake replied. "Just families trying to make new lives for ourselves. Surely your people understand the desire for a better life." Running Wolf considered this for a long moment. His warriors remained perfectly still, waiting for his command. Sarah could see the intelligence in his eyes, the careful way he was weighing his options. "We will take supplies as payment for passage through our lands," he finally announced. "Food, ammunition, and medicine. If you agree, you may continue your journey unharmed." Jake nodded quickly. "That seems fair. We can spare some supplies." But as the Apache warriors began collecting their tribute, Sarah noticed one of them staring at her with obvious interest. He was an older man with cruel eyes and scars across his cheek. He spoke to Running Wolf in their native language, gesturing towards Sarah. Running Wolf's expression darkened as he listened. He responded sharply in Apache, but the scarred warrior persisted, his voice becoming more insistent. Sarah could tell they were arguing about something, and she had a terrible feeling that she was the subject of their dispute. Eleanor grabbed Sarah's arm protectively. "Stay close to me," she whispered. "Don't draw attention to yourself," but it was too late. The scarred warrior, who Sarah would later learn was called Broken Hawk, dismounted and walked directly toward her. His intentions were clear from the predatory way he looked at her. "This one," he said in broken English, pointing at Sarah. "She comes with us." "No." Jake Morrison stepped forward with his rifle raised. "We had an agreement. You take supplies, not people." Broken Hawk laughed harshly. "White man's daughter will bring many horses in trade. She is worth more than all your supplies." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she realized what was happening. She was being claimed as a captive, probably to be sold or traded to another tribe. Eleanor tried to shield her with her own body, but Broken Hawk pushed the older woman aside roughly. "Please." Sarah found her voice at last. "I'm to be married. I have a family waiting for me." Broken Hawk reached for her arm, but suddenly Running Wolf was there, blocking his path. The two Apache warriors faced each other tensely, and Sarah could see the anger building between them. Running Wolf spoke again in Apache, his voice cold and authoritative. But Broken Hawk argued back, pointing at Sarah and then at himself. Other warriors began to take sides, and Sarah realized that her fate was being decided by a power struggle within the Apache band. The argument grew more heated, with several warriors drawing their weapons. Sarah watched in fascination and terror as Running Wolf and Broken Hawk continued their confrontation. She couldn't understand their words, but she could see that Running Wolf was trying to protect her from something worse than captivity. Finally, Broken Hawk made his move. He lunged towards Sarah, clearly intending to drag her away by force. But Running Wolf was faster. In one fluid motion, he drew his knife and placed himself between Sarah and Broken Hawk. "She is under my protection," Running Wolf said in English, his eyes never leaving Broken Hawk's face. "Anyone who touches her will answer to me." The tension in the canyon was thick enough to cut. Sarah found herself pressed against Running Wolf's back, feeling the strength and warmth of his body. Despite the danger, she felt safer with him than she had since the Apache first appeared. Broken Hawk snarled something in Apache and spat in the dust at Running Wolf's feet. Then he turned and stalked back to his horse, but Sarah could see that this was far from over. The scarred warrior's eyes promised revenge for this humiliation. Running Wolf turned to face Sarah, his dark eyes searching her face. For a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them standing together in the dusty canyon. "You will not be harmed," he said quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. "I give you my word." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but she could also see the desire there. Running Wolf was attracted to her just as strongly as she was to him, and that realization both thrilled and terrified her. The Apache warriors finished collecting their tribute and prepared to leave. As Running Wolf mounted his horse, he looked back at Sarah one more time. Their eyes met and held, and in that moment Sarah knew that her life had been changed forever by this encounter. The wagon train continued its journey after the Apache encounter, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Everyone remained on edge, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Jake Morrison doubled the night watch and kept the wagons closer together during the day. Sarah found herself changed as well. She couldn't stop thinking about Running Wolf and the way he had protected her from Broken Hawk. The memory of his strong presence and the promise in his eyes haunted her thoughts both day and night. She tried to focus on her upcoming marriage to Thomas Whitmore, but found it increasingly difficult to imagine a life with a man she had never met. Eleanor noticed Sarah's distraction and tried to engage her in conversation about their destination and the new lives waiting for them. But Sarah's responses were vague and distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. "Child, you've been different since that encounter with the Apache," Eleanor said gently as they sat by the campfire one evening. "I know it was frightening, but we're safe now." Sarah looked into the flames and struggled to find the right words. "Mrs. Hartwell, have you ever felt like your life was meant to be completely different from what everyone expects?" Eleanor studied Sarah's face in the firelight. The older woman had seen enough of life to recognize the signs of a heart in conflict. "Are you having doubts about your marriage, dear?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted quietly. "I've been doing what my father arranged, following the path he set for me. But meeting that Apache warrior made me realize there might be other possibilities, other ways to live." "Sarah," Eleanor said carefully, "that Apache warrior saved you from a terrible fate, but you mustn't confuse gratitude with something deeper. Your life is with your own people and civilization. But Sarah wasn't convinced. Over the next 2 days, she found herself watching the hills and hoping for another glimpse of Running Wolf. She knew it was foolish and dangerous, but she couldn't help herself. Something inside her had awakened during their brief encounter, something she had never felt before. On the third night after leaving the canyon, Sarah's wish was granted in a way she never expected. She had volunteered for the late watch, claiming she couldn't sleep. As she sat alone by the dying fire, she heard the soft sound of approaching footsteps. Her heart began to race as Running Wolf emerged from the darkness beyond the wagons. He moved silently like a shadow-given form. He was alone and unarmed, having left his weapons somewhere in the desert. "You should not be here," Sarah whispered, though she made no move to wake the others. "It's too dangerous." "I had to see you again," Running Wolf replied, his voice low and urgent. "I cannot stop thinking about you since we met in the canyon." They stood facing each other in the dim light of the dying fire, both aware that they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Sarah knew she should call for help or at least wake Eleanor, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. "Tell me about your life," she said instead. "Your people, your family." Running Wolf's eyes softened as he spoke. "My father was a great war chief, but he died fighting the Blue Soldiers when I was young. My mother raised me to be strong, to protect our people and our way of life. I have a younger sister who depends on me." "And Broken Hawk?" Sarah asked. "Why does he hate you?" Running Wolf's jaw tightened. "He believes he should lead our band instead of me. He thinks I am too willing to avoid war with the white man. When he saw you, he saw an opportunity to prove his strength and gain followers. By taking me captive? By taking you as a wife," Running Wolf said quietly. "In our customs, a man who captures a woman from another tribe and makes her his wife gains great respect. But I could not let him do that to you." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "So you saved me from marriage to him, only to send me toward marriage to another man I don't know." Running Wolf stepped closer, and Sarah could smell the sage and leather scent of his skin. "Is that what you want? Marriage to this rancher?" "It's what my father arranged," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's what I'm supposed to do." "That is not what I asked," Running Wolf said, his dark eyes searching her face. "What do you want, Sarah?" No one had ever asked her that question before. Her entire life had been shaped by what others wanted from her. Her father's desire to settle his debts, Thomas Whitmore's need for a wife, society's expectations of proper behavior. But what did she want? "I want to be free," she whispered, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. "I want to choose my own path, my own life." Running Wolf reached out and gently touched her cheek. "Then come with me." The offer hung between them like lightning in the desert air. Sarah knew that accepting would mean abandoning everything she had ever known, her culture, her family, her entire way of life. But staying meant a loveless marriage and a future mapped out by others. "I can't," she said, though her voice broke with longing. "Your people would never accept me, and mine would never forgive me." "My people judge by the heart, not the color of skin," Running Wolf said. "And as for your people, they have already sold you to a stranger for money. How much do they truly care about your happiness?" The truth of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father had indeed sold her to settle his gambling debts, caring nothing for her feelings or desires. And the people on the wagon train, while friendly enough, were essentially strangers who would go their separate ways once they reached California. "But I know nothing about your way of life," Sarah protested weakly. "I wouldn't know how to survive in your world." "I would teach you," Running Wolf said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "I would protect you and care for you. You would never be just a possession to be traded or a burden to be married off." Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks as she struggled with the impossible choice before her. Everything rational told her to refuse, to stick to the plan and marry Thomas Whitmore. But her heart was pulling her toward this Apache warrior, who offered her something she had never imagined possible: love and freedom. Before she could respond, they heard movement from one of the wagons. Eleanor was stirring in her sleep, and soon others would be waking for the next watch. Running Wolf melted back into the darkness as silently as he had come, but not before whispering, "I will wait for your answer." Sarah returned to her bedroll with her mind spinning and her heart aching. She knew that Running Wolf would keep his word and wait for her decision. But she also knew that choosing him would mean leaving behind everything familiar and safe for a life of uncertainty in an alien world. As she lay awake watching the stars, Sarah realized that for the first time in her life she had real power over her own destiny. The question was whether she had the courage to use it. The following days were torture for Sarah. She went through the motions of daily life on the wagon train, helping Eleanor with cooking and mending. But her thoughts were constantly with Running Wolf. Every night she hoped he would return, and every morning she felt the crushing disappointment when he didn't appear. Eleanor had begun to notice Sarah's distraction and growing unhappiness. The older woman had lived long enough to recognize the signs of a woman torn between duty and desire. She tried gently to counsel Sarah about the importance of making practical choices, but her words fell on deaf ears. Jake Morrison was also growing concerned. He had spotted Apache scouts following them at a distance for the past 3 days, and he worried that they might be planning another attack. He increased security and urged the travelers to be extra vigilant, but he had no idea that the real danger came from the feelings growing in Sarah's heart. On the 5th night since Running Wolf's visit, Sarah made her decision. She couldn't bear the thought of marrying Thomas Whitmore and living a life without love or purpose. When the camp settled down for the night, she quietly gathered a few belongings and slipped away into the darkness. She didn't have to go far before Running Wolf appeared beside her, as if he had been waiting in the shadows all along. His presence filled her with both relief and terror as she realized the magnitude of what she was about to do. "Are you certain?" he asked quietly, studying her face in the moonlight. "Once you come with me, there will be no going back." "I'm certain," Sarah said, though her voice trembled with fear and excitement. "I would rather face an uncertain future with you than a certain future of unhappiness without you." Running Wolf helped her onto his horse, and they rode silently into the desert night. Sarah looked back once at the wagon train sleeping peacefully in their circle, knowing she was leaving behind her old life forever. Eleanor would wake in the morning to find her gone, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt at abandoning the kind woman who had become like a mother to her. They rode for hours through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate in the darkness. But Running Wolf knew every rock and gully, guiding his horse with the skill of someone born to this harsh land. Sarah clung to his strong back, feeling the rhythm of the horse's movement and the warmth of Running Wolf's body against hers. As dawn broke over the desert, they arrived at a hidden camp nestled in a narrow canyon. Sarah saw her first Apache village and was amazed by how perfectly it blended with the natural surroundings. The wickiups were built low and camouflaged, almost invisible until you were right upon them. The Apache people who emerged to greet them were curious but not hostile. Running Wolf spoke to them in their own language, explaining Sarah's presence. She could tell from their expressions that bringing a white woman to their camp was unusual and controversial. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached them. Running Wolf spoke to her respectfully, and Sarah could tell this was someone important in the tribe. The woman studied Sarah carefully, taking in her appearance and bearing. "This is Singing Bird, my mother," Running Wolf explained to Sarah. "She wants to know if you come to us willingly or as a captive." "Willingly," Sarah said, looking directly into the older woman's eyes. "I chose to come here." Singing Bird nodded slowly and spoke again in Apache. Running Wolf translated, "She says you are welcome in our camp, but you must prove yourself worthy of our trust. Our people have suffered much at the hands of your people." Sarah understood the challenge in those words. She would have to earn her place in this community through her actions, not just her good intentions. It was both frightening and liberating to know that her worth would be judged by what she did, not who her father was or how much money she brought to a marriage. Over the following days, Sarah began to learn the ways of the Apache people. Singing Bird took her under her wing, teaching her how to prepare food, gather plants for medicine, and perform the countless tasks necessary for survival in the desert. The work was harder than anything Sarah had ever done, but she threw herself into it with determination. She learned to grind corn into meal, to weave baskets from willow branches, and to track the movement of animals across the harsh landscape. Her soft hands became calloused and strong, and her pale skin darkened from constant exposure to the sun. Not everyone in the camp accepted her presence. Some of the warriors, particularly those who followed Broken Hawk, viewed her with suspicion and hostility. They whispered among themselves when she passed, and Sarah could feel their disapproval, even when she couldn't understand their words. Broken Hawk himself was the worst. He never spoke to Sarah directly, but she could feel his hatred burning like a cold fire whenever their paths crossed. He was still angry about being humiliated in the canyon, and he blamed both Running Wolf and Sarah for his loss of face among the warriors. But there were also those who welcomed her. The women gradually accepted her as she proved her willingness to work and learn. The children were fascinated by her different appearance and would follow her around the camp, chattering in Apache and trying to teach her new words. Running Wolf was patient and gentle as he helped her adapt to her new life. In the evenings, when the work was done, he would sit with her and teach her about Apache customs and beliefs. He told her stories of his people's history, their struggles with the white soldiers, and their deep connection to the land. "My people believe that everything is connected," he explained one evening as they sat watching the stars. "The earth, the sky, the animals, the plants. We are all part of the same great circle of life. When you understand this, you will truly be Apache." Sarah was beginning to understand, not just intellectually but in her heart. She felt a connection to this harsh but beautiful land that she had never experienced in her comfortable life back east. Every sunrise brought new challenges, but also new discoveries about herself and her capabilities. 3 weeks after her arrival at the camp, Sarah faced her first real test. A group of blue soldiers had been spotted moving through Apache territory, and the warriors were preparing for possible conflict. Running Wolf would have to leave with the war party, and Sarah would be left alone in the camp for the first time. "I don't want you to go," she told Running Wolf the night before his departure. "What if something happens to you?" "I must go," he replied, his face grave with responsibility. "My people depend on me to protect them, but I promise I will return to you." The next morning, Sarah watched with a heavy heart as Running Wolf and the other warriors rode away into the desert. She threw herself into her work to distract from her worry, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change again. Her instincts proved correct. That very afternoon, Broken Hawk returned to the camp with news that would shatter the fragile peace Sarah had found with the Apache people. Singing Bird translated quietly for Sarah's benefit. She says Broken Hawk has brought shame on our people by forcing an innocent woman to risk death. She says the spirits saved you because you are pure of heart. Other voices began to join in, criticizing Broken Hawk's actions and supporting Running Wolf's defense of Sarah. The scarred warrior found himself increasingly isolated as the tribe turned against him. Finally, Gray Eagle, the eldest of the tribal council, raised his hand for silence. He spoke slowly and deliberately, his words carrying the weight of years and wisdom. When he finished, Broken Hawk's face had turned dark with rage and humiliation. "What did he say?" Sarah asked Singing Bird. "He said Broken Hawk must leave our band," the older woman replied. "He has proven himself unworthy to be Apache by his cruel and jealous actions. He is banished from our lands." Broken Hawk looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing only condemnation and rejection. He had gambled everything on his accusation against Sarah, and he had lost completely. With a final snarl of hatred, he stalked away toward his horse. But as he prepared to mount up and leave forever, Broken Hawk turned back toward Sarah and Running Wolf. His scarred face was twisted with malice, and his eyes promised that this was not the end of their conflict. "You think you have won," he said in his broken English. "But soldiers are coming, many soldiers with big guns. They will destroy this place and kill everyone here. Your white woman has brought death to the Apache." With those ominous words, Broken Hawk mounted his horse and rode away into the desert, leaving behind a camp full of frightened and confused people. Sarah felt a chill run through her as she realized that even though she had survived the test of the cliff, a much greater danger was approaching. The next morning brought grim confirmation of Broken Hawk's warning. Apache scouts returned to camp with news that a large force of cavalry soldiers was approaching from the east. They had cannons and supply wagons, suggesting they were planning a major assault on the Apache stronghold. Running Wolf immediately called a council of war with the tribal elders and remaining warriors. Sarah watched anxiously as they debated their options in rapid Apache. She could tell from their expressions and gestures that the situation was desperate. When the council broke up, Running Wolf came to Sarah with a heavy heart. "We must leave this place immediately," he told her. The soldiers are too many for us to fight, and they know exactly where to find us. But how could they know? Sarah asked, though she feared she already understood the answer. Running Wolf's face was grim. Someone told them. Someone who knew our location and our strength. Broken Hawk has betrayed us to save himself. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Broken Hawk's exile had been just the beginning of his revenge. Unable to defeat Running Wolf in honorable combat, he had chosen the path of ultimate treachery, leading the white soldiers to destroy his own people. The Apache camp erupted into controlled chaos as families rushed to pack their most essential belongings. Wickiups were quickly dismantled, and horses were loaded with supplies for the dangerous journey ahead. Sarah marveled at how efficiently the Apache people could abandon their home when survival demanded it. Singing Bird helped Sarah gather her few possessions, including the Apache clothing the women had made for her. The older woman's face was sad but determined as she prepared to leave behind the place where she had raised her children and buried her husband. "Where will we go?" Sarah asked as she secured her pack to Running Wolf's horse. "Into the deep desert," he replied, checking his weapons one final time. "To places the soldiers cannot follow with their heavy wagons and cannons. We will find a new home somewhere they cannot reach us." But even as he spoke, Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. The Apache's traditional hiding places were becoming fewer each year, as more soldiers and settlers moved into their territory. Each retreat took them further from the lands their ancestors had roamed for generations. The column of Apache refugees began moving just after dawn, heading west toward the most inhospitable parts of the desert. Running Wolf rode at the front with the other warriors, constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The women, children, and elderly followed on foot or on the few remaining horses. Sarah walked alongside Singing Bird and the other women, her soft boots already wearing thin on the rocky ground. She had learned much about Apache ways in her weeks with the tribe, but this forced march would test her endurance like nothing before. By midday, they could see dust clouds on the eastern horizon, the unmistakable sign of the approaching cavalry. The soldiers were following their trail, moving faster than the Apache refugees could travel while burdened with their families and possessions. Running Wolf called a halt and gathered the warriors for another hurried conference. Sarah watched with growing dread as they argued about their options. Some wanted to make a stand and fight, while others advocated splitting up to confuse their pursuers. Finally, Running Wolf made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "The women and children will continue west with most of the horses and supplies," he announced to the gathered tribe. "The warriors will turn south and try to draw the soldiers away from the main group." Sarah immediately understood what this meant. Running Wolf was choosing to sacrifice himself and his men to save the rest of the tribe. It was the act of a true leader, but it would probably cost him his life. "No," Sarah said, grabbing Running Wolf's arm as he prepared to mount his warhorse. "There has to be another way. We can find a place to hide until they give up and go away." Running Wolf's eyes were filled with sadness as he looked down at her. "The soldiers will not give up, Sarah. They have cannons that can destroy any hiding place we might find. This is the only way to save our people." "Then I'm coming with you," Sarah declared firmly. "I won't be separated from you again." "You cannot," Running Wolf replied gently. "You are not a warrior, and the fighting will be fierce. Stay with my mother and the other women. They will protect you." But Sarah was beyond listening to reason. The thought of losing Running Wolf just when they had found each other was unbearable. She had already given up everything else in her life for him. She would not give him up too. "I beg you," she said desperately, her voice breaking with emotion. "I won't belong to them if you die. Don't leave me to face that fate alone. Claim me as yours completely and forever." Running Wolf's resolve wavered as he saw the love and desperation in Sarah's eyes. He knew she was right about what would happen to her if he died. The approaching soldiers would show no mercy to a white woman who had chosen to live with the Apache. Before he could answer, the sound of gunfire erupted from the eastern ridge. The cavalry scouts had caught up with them faster than expected, and bullets began kicking up dust around the Apache column. Running Wolf drew his bow and knocked an arrow in one smooth motion. His face was transformed into the mask of a warrior as he prepared to face his enemies. "She belongs to me," he declared loudly enough for everyone to hear, both in English and Apache. The declaration sent a thrill through Sarah even as terror gripped her heart. She was Running Wolf's woman now, officially and completely. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The Apache warriors formed a defensive line as the cavalry charged down from the ridge. Sarah crouched behind a boulder with the other women, but she could see Running Wolf in the center of the fighting, his arrows flying with deadly accuracy. The battle was fierce, but brief. The Apache warriors fought with the desperation of men protecting their families, but they were outnumbered 3-1. One by one, Sarah watched them fall under the soldiers' superior firepower. Running Wolf continued fighting even after he was wounded, an arrow protruding from his shoulder and blood streaming down his arm. He seemed unstoppable, a force of nature rather than a mere man. But even the greatest warrior has limits. A rifle bullet finally found its mark, spinning Running Wolf around and sending him crashing to the ground. Sarah screamed his name and started to run toward him, but Singing Bird held her back with surprising strength. "Wait," the older woman hissed. "Look." Sarah looked and saw something that filled her with both hope and horror. Running Wolf was still alive, struggling to rise despite his wounds. But he was surrounded by soldiers with their rifles pointed at his chest. The Apache warrior who had captured her heart was now a prisoner, and Sarah realized that their greatest trial was yet to come. The cavalry captain was a harsh-faced man named Colonel Morrison, who had built his reputation fighting Apache across the southwestern territories. He surveyed the battlefield with satisfaction, counting the fallen warriors and the captured survivors with cold efficiency. Sarah watched in horror as the soldiers roughly bound Running Wolf's wounds and chained his hands behind his back. Despite his injuries, the Apache warrior held his head high, refusing to show any sign of defeat or surrender to his captors. The women and children who had been captured were herded together like cattle, their faces showing the resignation of people who had suffered this fate before. Sarah tried to blend in with them, hoping the soldiers wouldn't notice that she was different. But Colonel Morrison had sharp eyes and long experience dealing with Apache captives. He spotted Sarah immediately and strode over to examine her more closely. His weathered face showed surprise and disgust as he realized what he was looking at. Well, he said in a voice loud enough for all his men to hear. "Look what we have here, boys." A white woman who chose to live with the savages. The soldiers gathered around Sarah, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and contempt. She had heard enough stories to know what happened to white women who were found living with Indians. In the eyes of her own people, she had become something worse than an enemy. "What's your name, girl?" Colonel Morrison demanded. Sarah lifted her chin defiantly. "Sarah Elizabeth Patterson," she replied, using her maiden name rather than acknowledging her engagement to Thomas Whitmore. "And how long have you been living with these heathens?" The colonel continued his interrogation. "I came here by choice," Sarah said firmly. "I was not captured or forced. I chose to leave my own people to be with the man I love." Colonel Morrison's face darkened with anger. "Chose? You chose to betray your own race and live like an animal? You chose to give aid and comfort to the enemies of civilization?" Before Sarah could answer, Running Wolf spoke up from where he knelt in chains. "She has done nothing wrong," he said in clear English. "She came to us seeking freedom from a marriage she did not want. We protected her and taught her our ways." The colonel turned his attention to the Apache warrior with interest. "So you can speak the white man's language. That makes you even more dangerous than I thought. You understand our ways well enough to corrupt our women." "I understand your ways well enough to know you have no honor," Running Wolf replied without flinching. "You make treaties and then break them. You promise peace and then bring war. You are the ones without civilization." Colonel Morrison's hand moved to his pistol, but he controlled his anger with visible effort. "You'll have plenty of time to think about civilization where you're going, Apache. The reservation will teach you the value of white man's law." But his attention returned to Sarah, and she could see a cruel plan forming in his mind. "As for you, Miss Patterson, you present a more complex problem. Technically, you're a white woman who should be rescued and returned to her people, but you've also been living in sin with the enemy." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as she realized what the colonel was suggesting. In his eyes, she was no longer truly white, but she wasn't Apache either. She occupied a dangerous middle ground that made her a target for both sides. "I propose a solution that serves justice," Colonel Morrison announced to his men. "This woman will be returned to civilization to face trial for treason and collaboration with hostile Indians. If convicted, she'll spend the rest of her life in prison, thinking about the consequences of her choices. No. Running Wolf struggled against his chains, his face contorted with rage and desperation. She is under my protection. She belongs to me. The colonel laughed harshly. Your protection means nothing now, Apache. You're going to a reservation and she's going to prison. You'll never see each other again. But Sarah had made her own decision about her fate. She had already given up everything for love once. She was prepared to do it again. As the soldiers prepared to load the prisoners into wagons for transport, she made her move. Wait, she called out to Colonel Morrison. I have information that might be valuable to you. The colonel paused, his interest clearly piqued. What kind of information? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would either save them or doom them both. I know where Broken Hawk is hiding. The Apache warrior who betrayed his own people to help you find this camp. I can lead you to him. This was a complete lie, but Sarah hoped it would buy them time and possibly create an opportunity for escape. She had no idea where Broken Hawk had gone after his exile, but she was betting that Colonel Morrison's hatred for Apache warriors would override his suspicion. Running Wolf stared at Sarah in shock, not understanding her strategy. To him it sounded like she was offering to betray another Apache, even one who had betrayed them first. Why would you help us capture this Broken Hawk? Colonel Morrison asked suspiciously. Because he's the one responsible for all of this, Sarah replied, the words coming more easily as she built her deception. He's the one who told you where to find the camp. He caused the deaths of these warriors and the capture of these innocent women and children. I want to see him pay for his crimes. The colonel considered this carefully. Broken Hawk had indeed provided valuable intelligence about Apache movements and strongholds. But the scarred warrior had also demanded payment in gold and supplies that the army could barely afford. If they could capture him instead of paying him, it would solve several problems at once. And in exchange for this information, Morrison asked. You let the women and children go free, Sarah said boldly. They've done nothing wrong except try to survive in a world that wants to destroy them. Absolutely not, the colonel replied immediately. But I might be willing to arrange better treatment for you and your Apache lover here. Instead of prison and the reservation, perhaps a more comfortable form of custody. Sarah knew this was as good an offer as she was likely to get. She also knew that once they were away from this place, there might be opportunities for escape that didn't exist here surrounded by 40 armed soldiers. I'll need proof of your good faith, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Remove the chains from Running Wolf and let him ride beside me. If you want me to guide you to Broken Hawk, I need to know you'll keep your word about better treatment. Colonel Morrison studied Sarah's face carefully, trying to determine if she was sincere or attempting some kind of deception. Finally, he nodded to his sergeant. Remove the Apache's chains, but keep him under heavy guard. If either of them tries to escape, shoot them both. As the soldiers freed Running Wolf from his bonds, Sarah caught his eye and tried to convey her plan without words. She hoped he would understand that she was buying them time and opportunity, not truly betraying their Apache family. Running Wolf's dark eyes showed confusion and hurt, but also trust. He had faith in the woman who had given up everything to be with him. Whatever her plan was, he would follow her lead and hope for the best. As the column of soldiers and prisoners began moving south toward the supposed location of Broken Hawk, Sarah rode beside Running Wolf and tried to think of a way to turn her desperate gamble into real salvation. The desert stretched endlessly before them, holding both danger and possibility in its vast embrace. Behind them, the remaining Apache women and children were loaded into wagons for transport to the reservation. Sarah's heart ached as she watched Singing Bird's proud face disappear into the distance, knowing she might never see Running Wolf's mother again. But ahead lay uncertainty and perhaps hope. If Sarah could somehow outwit Colonel Morrison and find a way to escape with Running Wolf, they might still have a chance at the life they had dreamed of together. It would require courage, cunning, and more than a little luck. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Sarah and Running Wolf rode toward an unknown destiny. They were still prisoners, still separated from their people, but they were together, and as long as they had each other, there was always hope for freedom.